Welcome, friends and followers, to the Transforming the Human Experience podcast Facebook Live show here. I am here today with my friend Joe Smarro, and we're going to have a pretty interesting conversation today. And as usual, just got to get all my tech in line here for it. So as we get started, if you are joining us live here, go ahead and let me know where you're coming in from. If you got questions for Joe throughout the show, please let us know. Drop it in the chat box here for Facebook. I am watching that. And if you have any comments or questions or want to give a shout out to Joe as we're here, do that too. I'll let him know that you're out there. So today, what are we going to dive into? We're going to talk really about the topic of mental health. That's where we're going to come at it, but we're going to come at it from a couple different perspectives. So as we go through this, you'll kind of get the gist of why we're coming at it this way today. So Joe, my guest, he wears a number of hats. He's a police officer. He has been a star in the HBO documentary Ernie and Joe Crisis Cops. He's the CEO of Solution Point, and he works on training corporations, schools, law enforcement around the country on topics of mental health, mental wellness, how to handle situations, especially de-escalation, communication, those types of things. And we'll dive deeper into that so you guys can understand what more of the type of work he does. But the reason I actually met Joe was back in April. Betsy Westhafer and I put on this 9-hour marathon live seminar. I think Joe was with us the whole time, which is awesome. And Joe was our keynote speaker in the afternoon, and he gave a phenomenal talk about communication and how to improve your communication skills and really how to talk with people when there are at that point in time, we were in the first month of lockdown. And so we were talking about like, what do businesses need to be aware of? How do they work with their employees? Things like that. That was the kind of the topic we talked about. And so today we're going to talk about that as well, but we're going to take a little bit different approach. We're going to talk more on, we've been in this crisis for so long now. I mean, it's been 4 months and it's going to continue. Kids are getting ready to go back to school. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. Parents are trying to figure out how to juggle work and home. So there's a lot of stuff to talk about. So with that, I'm going to shut up for a moment, Joe. And if you would like to tell people a little bit about who you are, kind of your background, where you came from, and we'll kick it off with that.
Thanks, Tony. It's a hell of an introduction. So yeah, no, as he said, I live in South Texas, and I've been a police officer for 15 years. Before that, I was in the Marine Corps for 4 years, stationed in California. I did 2 deployments overseas, one to Afghanistan, one to Iraq. And before that, I came from New York. So I'm originally from upstate New York, and I am currently living in South Texas, which is just dreadful because it's like 194 degrees every day and it makes me angry. And so not only do I have to really sharpen my skills about how I teach and what I teach, but I actually have to like implement them myself, which I think makes for the best coaching is people who use their own advice. So anyway, I really am excited to be here. That event that I got to do with Tony and Betsy several months ago was a great event. And so I was excited when you reached out to me, Tony, and asked me if I wanted to do this, because again, I think as much as, and as far as why we can get this message out there of hope and self-care and resilience and wellness and really just how to live our best lives in the midst of uncertainty, I think is important. So super excited to be here.
I think you said it right there, how to live our best lives in the midst of uncertainty. That is just the key. We've all got to find ways. I mean, whatever we've learned, whatever we've been taught was just scratching the surface of what we're going through. I think most have not been through something like this in their lives before, you know? So you mentioned you've been in the Marine Corps and you've been a police officer. And I guess I want to really turn the tables toward that journey took you to kind of an unusual place and really took you to HBO of all things. So I just want to kind of start there a little bit. You can tell me a little bit of the background, what really fits there. But you were the star of this documentary called Ernie and Joe Crisis Cops. So talk us a little bit through what the show's about and why you were there, why you've gotten in this unique position that you're in.
That's a great question, Tony. I think, honestly, for me, it's luck that I was there. mental health unit started back in 2008. So it's nothing really new. We really do focus on crisis intervention and de-escalation in law enforcement. And so we really focus on training the officers on how to better deal with members in the community, especially if they're suffering from a mental health crisis. Because it's a unique approach, because our unit really got a lot of attention nationally, we've been identified as one of the best programs, this gold standard. A lot of people look to us throughout the nation as to how we do things, which really comes down to collaboration, understanding the benefits, the mutual benefits of having collaboration between your police department and your stakeholders is super, super important. And having, police officers understanding how to navigate that and how to take people where historically they were incarcerated, but understanding the benefits of treatment versus incarceration and getting them into services, getting them help, even if they were historically going to jail, now developing jail diversion programs. And so there was a lot of media that was looking at us. There was news stories, there were different video clips, there were little shorts, documentaries. And there was one story in particular that was written called Policing with Velvet Gloves. It was written by the incredible Ann Snyder, and her husband is actually a friend of the filmmaker, Jen McShane. And so just through conversation, she was like, hey, you should have your friend look at this. There's something special going on down in San Antonio. So Jen McShane, who is an original native of New York, lives in Connecticut, but she came down to South Texas, just no cameras, nothing, just came to kind of meet us, meet the unit, meet several people, did a couple ride-alongs for several days to determine, is there a story here? And she quickly realized within that first day of, one, damn it, I wish I had my camera, but two, there's something bigger here. And I really think that the rest of the country needs to see what's happening and what's possible. And as she would say, it's not a film about policing and in the blueprint of how to do it, but it is a film about inspiration and hope and possibility and what can happen when human beings are willing to meet other human beings where they are and kind of strip away the roles that we play and cop versus consumer, rather than I'm just a person showing up to help another person.
I think that's what touched me most about the movie. And we had a conversation. I met you through Betsy, and then she's like, you got to watch the movie. So I went out there and watched it, and it was just, it really blew me away, the level of human to human connection, which is that's why I titled the show that today, because I was like, every time we've talked, there's this level of connection that you talk about it, you're passionate about it. And it's ironic, I guess, maybe in a way, because it's the work I do in customer experience is all human to human as well. I often say it's not business to business, it's human to human, no matter what role you're playing in business. So I guess there's an affinity there for your philosophy in that. So in that movie, it really shows, as you said, the hope that there can be a different way, a different approach to things. And you've done a great job of being able to develop that with a great team there. Where are you taking that today? Like, let's move forward from that movie, which is phenomenal. Everyone go out there, watch it. So I want to spend more time on what you're doing with it today and how we can help people today and give hope today.
Yeah. So just to plug it, I mean, so sadly, the timing of this is a tad late, but HBO was kind enough to release it onto YouTube for free up until July 15th, but they've since taken it down. So it's been a week since they pulled it off, but it still is available streaming on HBO. I think they purchased it for 3 years from Jennifer to have the rights to it. So they might release it again on HBO. I don't know. We will promote that if they do, but a great way to connect with it is to go to Ernie and Joe thefilm.com. They have a website, their social media. You can follow and keep up with what they're doing. The reason Jen went with HBO, after meeting with several people, I mean, she met with many different players and PBS and Apple and the likes of Netflix and everything. But for her, it was very important that whoever she was going to partner with was going to allow her to really have some autonomy when it comes to doing outreach. Because for her, this wasn't just about providing a film so that people see it and they're inspired, like, oh, that's cool. Like, that's nice. I feel connected with that. But really for police departments to maybe see things as an opportunity to do things different. And so she's pushing hard to get it as a mandatory viewing in all police academies. She's trying to get, the National Association of Counties and National Alliance on Mental Illness and these different national organizations to really buy into the opportunity of what this film can provide. Because again, while it's not a blueprint, it's a conversation starter. And so people can watch this and think, is there a way that we could possibly do things differently, better, smarter? And is it better for the end user? Is it better for the officers? Is it better for the community? And the answer is yes, absolutely. And so we're not saying, hey, copy this, because what we know is that just because the model works here doesn't mean that a replica is going to work where you are, because really a successful program is dependent upon the available resources in the community. It's such a huge piece. But training is a huge piece. Resources is a huge piece. Education within the community is a huge piece. And so there's so much that goes with that. So follow the film, ernieandjoethefilm.com. As far as me, because while they are pushing that film and they're doing the outreach, before the film ever really came out, because that was a 3-year process, Tony. I don't know if you knew that or not, but she filmed us for,
wow.
Yeah, she filmed us for 3 years and has, I think they said about 300 hours of footage to condense it down to 96 minutes, which is a testament to her team that was able to do that. But I know they're working hard. Again, COVID's kind of a bummer to all people and all things, but they're working hard to provide outreach and do virtual screenings and webinars and things like that. Personally, Jesse and I started Solution Point Plus back in 2017. The film came out in 2019. We never thought this was something that would go hand in hand. If anything, for me, what I'm very, very grateful for is that the film really did provide some personal recognition, branding, awareness to who I am as a person. Again, I'm the first to tell you, I'm not a cop. That's a job that I do. It's not my identity. I am so much more than what I do during the day. And I really think it's important that other people understand that regardless of what you do in the world, if you're attached to your profession as your identity, you have an identity crisis. And people need to realize that they're far more than their professions and their titles and their achievements. And so for me, when we started this business and consulting and training nationally, different police departments, hospitals, schools, providing keynotes, whatever it is, the mission is always the same. It's really getting people to kind of become unstuck, get out of their own way, recognize opportunity, and learn to better understand themselves so that they can better serve the person in front of them. And that transcends all business, all experiences. I mean, it really does not matter what you do or where you are. I think that transcends everything. Better understand yourself so that you can better serve or friend or spouse or child or neighbor or colleague or boss or whatever, insert anything. You can do that better the more you know about yourself. And so that's our mission.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. I got some comments coming in here. Stacy says that she'd love to see the film, so go out there. It's on HBO. If you don't have HBO, there's other ways to get there. So, and then actually, my brother, who is he's a father of a special needs daughter and civil rights attorney, he says your work sounds incredible. So definitely shout out there. And then another good friend of mine is Deanna. She says yes, big yes there for you. So the work that I'm involved in with Deanna, actually it's a nonprofit that I'm on the board of, and Deanna founded it. It's called the Personal Impact Foundation. So we are very much aligned with the same thing. Our focus is really on helping the legal, medical, and dental professions. So the students all the way up through the professionals, really helping them so they get away from addiction and suicide, help them with mental and emotional resilience and that. So I play in the space a little bit, but not nearly as much as you who do it full time. So definitely appreciate that. So your work now has expanded. It's going around the country. Other police departments are getting into this. Other law enforcement agencies are tapping into this whole idea, which I think is very, timely with everything that's going on right now. It's challenging for everyone, and in the midst of COVID, we've got everyone, essentially locked indoors in their homes, not able to go to their businesses. So all of our traditional ways of getting out and being around people and connecting have really taken a hit. And I keep telling people, get on Facebook Live, do video chats with people, just get out there and get in front of them. What would your advice be as someone who's out there every day and doing this work? What would you say some of the best tips would be for parents, for business leaders, just to get reconnected?
I love it, because I think, well, my mind just immediately went to like 7 different things. And so I'll try and be as concise as possible. Why this is so important, Tony, is I think, one, because what the first thing that came up for me is leverage technology, right? It gets pre-COVID, it kind of gets a bad rap. Some people are like, I love technology, it's great, but we know all about the addictions and social media. And so we tend to focus on the negativity bias of all things. Like, we find the holes, we find the problems. But I think now more than ever, what COVID really has proven is that technology is super, super vital to our existence in this day and age. I mean, it's 2020. We can't get away from it. So if you have the ability, leverage technology to absolutely stay connected despite our forced isolation, or I guess it's what word am I looking for here? Encouraged isolation, right? Social distancing and all this. And so to me, because I know the value of words and I believe words matter, I never was a fan of that right away when they said social distancing. To me, I was like, no, let's do physical distancing. But we shouldn't be talking about social distancing, because I think already we've become such an isolated people. So many people, even if we live in the hustle and bustle and work in these environments where there's masses of people, I still believe that is our representative self. And so many of us kind of go out into the world with these masks on, terrified to reveal who we really are, terrified to actually be authentic and vulnerable with our colleagues and our peers and our subordinates or our bosses, terrified because of the stigma about what people might think about us or say about us. And my fear is that with this quarantine, all it's done is it's created a lifestyle that's validated our already negative behaviors and beliefs, which is hiding is a good thing and hiding is safe. So while I want to say leverage technology, use it to connect, I agree with Tony, do Facebooks. There are so many ways that you can connect in real time just from your phone. But I also want to be mindful of the fact, again, in my experience, I serve a vast population of people that don't have access to any technology, and they're very limited in their resource. And so, which means they're probably not watching this. But if you know somebody who doesn't have the same means as you, it doesn't mean don't do anything, right? And so if you don't have access to technology or a phone that has the capacity to connect to an internet or Wi-Fi and go live or whatever, I would say just be mindful of what you are consuming. Be mindful of what you are putting into your mind. Be mindful of the resources that you're relying on to get information. Education is such a huge piece of this. And it's like we have, regardless of what you want to call it, I don't want to make this divisive, but we have the left, the right, the center. We have all these things. And I think that points to a bigger issue in our society as a culture is we tend to immediately focus on the things that make us different. And one of the things I absolutely loved about COVID was it was the great equalizer. It affected everybody in every continent, in every country. If you were a human being in existence in 2020, you heard about COVID, you knew about COVID, and you were somehow directly or indirectly affected by COVID. And so we absolutely united via a pandemic, but I think there's a greater lesson in that. And so I think, especially if you are someone who tends to err on the side of sadness or worry or anxiety or depression, I am someone who has by force, really by no other choice, because I've suffered some really, really dark times. But for me, it was, I have no choice but to find the silver lining in every situation. I've developed the ability to be a serial optimist and find the good in everything because I've been suffering since 7 years old, off and on, and massive amounts of trauma. So because I find the good in everything, that's something that I've realized that really has helped me get through this, because like any other business, I took a huge hit. We lost more than 11 paying jobs that were on the books. We lost thousands and thousands of dollars coming our way that were already secured. some things postponed, some things outright canceled, some things, changed to webinar, which significantly reduced the cost and income. And it was a huge hit. And so I know that I'm just a piece of this, but there's people who had it way worse. There's people who had it far better. But understanding that we've all been affected by this thing, nobody is alone in their experience of what COVID is. Nobody. And so hopefully throughout all of that scattered response, there was something in there for somebody that they could resonate with. I apologize for being all over the place.
No, I think it was good though, because you hit on a number of things. One of them is this whole idea of how we label each other, how we look for what's different. And there's a really human need for it, because we need to feel part of something. So we got to exclude someone, we got to pull some together and say, this is my group who I'm familiar with. But then there is that dangerous side to it, where we start labeling people and we start excluding them from things. And so that to me is one of those things that we have to address pretty straightforward. And then the other piece that I pulled out of that is this whole idea of the mask. And we're having these debates over whether the mask that we're wearing, but as you said, everyone's wearing a mask all the time. It's our self-identity and how we project ourselves to the world, right? So let's dive a little deeper into that. What are you seeing right now? What's happening for people from your perspective with how they're identifying themselves and how they've changed? And I keep hearing people say, I can't wait till they get back to normal. And before I respond to that, I want to hear what your response is on that.
First thing is, there's no getting back to normal. There's only creating what will be our future normal, which I think is undetermined. I also think that a big part of what our normal is going to look like is based on your own mindset. I'm a firm believer in this idea between the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. If you are someone who has a fixed mindset, the future is potentially very bleak, and it's scary, and it's worry. What we also know is that anxiety really is just it's fear of a made up story that's in the future that is yet to come true. And what we also know is that most of what we fear never comes true. People who are suffering from depression oftentimes are focused on things that have already happened in the past, and they haven't had the ability or the experience to process it, to let go of it, to forgive, whatever it is. So understanding depression, understanding anxiety. I think the people who are talking about, I can't wait for things to get back to normal, I think that this has been such a monumental, just seismic shift in how we do things. I think that there was so much realized through this pandemic that while we will adjust, I think that there are so many things being created right before us that are going to support the idea of this distance learning, working from home. I think, there's many companies that are now realizing, wait a minute, maybe I don't need as much square footage. I don't need as big of a footprint to run this brick and mortar if I can have 30 or 60% of my workforce working from home, and we can be just as effective. So much of the retail space is transitioning into online, and how are we going to do that? Because now I've been forced for the last several months to shop online, to buy online. And so we're seeing so much of this pivoting that's having to happen out of need. So whatever the new normal is, I think, again, be mindful of your own mindset and how you view and see the world, which I think is a huge, huge piece. I also think that ties into the first part of your question, Tony, which is how we identify. For me, this is something that culturally, and again, my experience is obviously here in America, so I'm not very familiar globally, but I would imagine, based on my global experience, that I have been to numerous countries and several continents and worked with people in various capacities. What I believe is that, I say our people are people are people. And while we might look different, we might talk different, we might have different cultures, people are people are people. And we all have the same intrinsic desires. We all want to feel loved. We all want to feel safe. We all want to be seen. And we would all love to be understood. And whatever that means for you, right? Because again, it could be different culturally, but everybody wants that. Everybody wants that. And so we lose our way. And again, I think this is an identity crisis. We lose our way when we start to put more emphasis on achievements, right? What's the American dream? Get through school, get good grades, go to college, go to the university, get the degree, get the career, get the spouse, get the house, get the kid, live life happily ever after. I cannot tell you how many people I've met that have done exactly that and are miserable. And it's because they're living the life in accordance with someone else's plan for them. And we have to accept the fact that just like a thumbprint or a snowflake, we are all individually unique. There is no one size fits all for the human experience. And for me, this is what works. Again, it's not for everybody, but for me, if we accept the fact that life is a game, you are a player in a game and you get to set your rules. Yes, there's laws. Yes, there's, obviously things that we have to fall within, but you ultimately get to set your rules. You get to set your intentions. You get to set your mindset. And people forget this because, again, and I don't want to go too far off my soapbox, Tony, unless you ask this question directly, but I really believe that this starts in our public school systems. I think we're not teaching kids the right thing. I don't think we're teaching kids how to become adults in this country. I don't think we're teaching kids necessarily how to become human beings. I think we're teaching kids how to pass standardized tests to get ranks. I think we focus so much energy on a grade system or a number system, which really does extinguish creativity. We're not teaching financial literacy, entrepreneurship, how to fail, how to communicate, mental health. And so I think that there's a lot that needs to be looked at there in how we prepare our small children, our youth, to really grow into an adult, to have the best chance at this human experience, which is to be the best player in this game that we're all in. And some are better than others. Some have a different set of rules, but we're in a game, and how you play it really is up to you. But we have people who blame things, or like, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I practice this, I do this, I'm a cop, I'm a veteran, I'm a father, I'm a husband. And it's like, no, you're not. Those are things that you do. Those are things you have, none of which you take with you. Right. And I'll end with this. In all the talks I give, I ask people, I pose this question: who are you? And people are right away, titles, achievements, degrees, benchmarks, whatever it is, money, status. And it's like, stop. No, you're not. Strip away your titles, strip away your achievements, strip away your degrees, strip away all of that. What's left? Who are you? And they're like, because what am I doing now? I'm forced to self-reflect. I have to sit there and think about, like, well, who am I? I don't know. And that's most people, in my opinion. Most people do not know who they are outside of what they do, what they've achieved, what their status is, and we lose our way. And I think that is one of the that's the biggest issue. And that, and focusing on what makes us different from people, to the point you were making earlier, Tony, about, sociologists support this in group and out group. And if you look like me, think like me, talk like me, act like me, you're in my in group. If you don't, you're in the out group. And the assumption then is if you're in the out group, you're immediately an adversary, you're against me. And then that's where we see this divide.
Yeah, I think that is so critical to understand that part. I want to go back because you hit so many good points there, and I think I know we will address the school part, because it's so important, especially with what we're going through today. The kids are going back to school in an entirely different scenario. So I'm going to come back to that because I want to hit on something else first. My brain is like yours. I can go down 100 paths, and then I'm like, okay, we're only going to get through 3 of these. So we're already off course from what I told people we're going to talk about, and that's okay. I'm good with that. So that's the beauty of having my own show, right? I can do what I want to do.
That's right. Yep. We're just having conversation.
That's right. Exactly. So it's interesting. So I look back to a couple things strike me about COVID-19 and what's going to happen, what's going to come out of this potentially. And I like how you address this. We get to create that future new normal that's out there. I look back to 2007, 2008, 2009, the financial crisis. Most people watching this lived through it, probably were working or had a business in that time frame that they were navigating this process through. That was about halfway through millennials getting into the workforce. About half of them were in, about half of them had to come into the workforce. 2016, they hit their peak. And when I look at what happened, we had the iPhone come out, we had all this new technology. 2007 was the iPhone, 2010 was the iPad. So this massive shift in how we live lives, how we experience life itself. And they also shifted as they start earning money. The millennials start shifting from buying stuff to buying experiences. And it was, as I was contemplating this, I began to realize actually their games have all changed too. They grew up playing games that access different levels of mastery. They don't care about accumulating stuff. They put stuff in their backpack and they throw it away when they don't need it. They put another thing in, they throw it away. And it's like, we can't understand how millennials work. Well, it's because they grew up differently. I played the game of life and Monopoly and everything else, whereas like I was accumulating all the pieces, all the board, everything I could on the board, going as fast as I could down the board. That's not how life is played today. So, from that game analogy, I think COVID-19 opens up a brand new opportunity. And I think it's a shift because we have, again, Gen Z is now coming into the workforce, right? And millennials have been here, Gen Z is coming in. I really believe that this is a time where we're going to shift from this idea of success and accumulation and even levels of mastery to significance. What is meaningful? I've talked to so many CEOs, this show or other podcasts and that I've talked to CEOs where they're just like, man, my people, and they're just in tears because they don't know how to bring their company back to help the people. And so I feel like this is we're going to move into this age of significance, and I think if we create it, it will happen. So that's kind of my monologue to respond to yours there. I don't know if you have any commentary in back.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. And I love that. And you're right, because it's interesting how many times we're hearing this right now. And because look at the movements that are happening across the country, everyone is trying to leave their impact. And it's, to me, they're seeing whether it's social justice or whatever it is, but they're seeing an opportunity to really, really affect change, meaningful change. And again, I know a lot of people don't agree on everything, and there's a lot of conflicting opinions about all this. But if we're honest with ourselves, this is part of evolving. Is really saying, here's the other thing I love, and it plays into this, is not only like, who are you, and getting stuck with that of like, oh, you're making me uncomfortable, I'm having to sit in my feelings, but also asking things like, why do you believe what you believe? And if you're honest, peeling back those layers to think like, man, it's interesting. I believe what I believe because I was told to believe it, or I was taught to believe it, because a lot of us are kind of an accumulation of our past experiences of what we grew up with. And so do you really believe what you're saying you believe, or do you believe what you believe because someone told you you're supposed to? And so we have to, part of evolving is also accepting that is it possible that there's another side there's another way to see this? And the answer is always yes. Because if we have this myopic view of everything's a one, or everything is just this way, that's where we're seeing these problems. And I think now more than ever, the Gen Z movement that's coming out is like, hey, we have to be willing to challenge the status quo. We have to be willing to look at things from a different lens and see if there's a better, smarter way to do things and kind of come together. But the problem is that, we'll find any way we can to create divide, just to, I don't know. It's sad.
I think my hope for Gen Z is that I believe they're going to be the most influential generation. I'm not talking about like, influencers on social media and things like that. That's probably a part of it, but a symptom more than anything else. But if you look at the stats, they have influenced the purchasing that their parents have done when they had no money. They redirected the economy in so many ways between like vegetarianism, veganism, more sustainable products. The kids were begging the parents to buy different products, and the parents said, okay, we'll go that direction. Some of them did, right? And so we see now they're going to come into the workforce and have their own money. So I think the impact of influence that they're going to have, I'm excited for that, to be honest with you. I know it's not going to be comfortable. I know there's going to be things that challenge me, but I'm excited for it because I think there's going to be a lot of good that comes out of that. So
I think, real quick, I think that the other thing, and again, this is just my opinion, but while I 100% agree with what you just said, my fear also is that as that's happening, simultaneously, we're going to see the most significant increase in mental health and depression. And I'm not sure exactly as to why that is, but what I am seeing in my world is a drastic increase in mental health, in the needs of people and the younger people, just how many young people are suffering right now really is concerning.
Well, let's jump into that a little bit right here, because I think parents are struggling. One, most parents haven't been taught how to deal with their own emotions. They haven't been taught how to be mentally well. And it goes beyond just having a therapist and that. I mean, there's so much more to it. There's things that we can do as individuals to grow our resilience and our mental wellness. what are some things, let's just take parents. What are some things that parents should be watching for? Because, if you see your kids and if you don't see your kids, you got, get involved with their life a little bit. What should they be watching for? And B, what should they do if they start to see some of these signs?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, one, be honest with yourself. Know your limitations, not just as a parent, but as a person. Because again, I think unless we're operating from a place of authenticity, it's going to be very hard to connect with anyone, child or not, blood family or not. If we're not being honest with ourselves and understanding our own limitations, it's going to be difficult to connect with any other person. The other thing for the parent specific is extend yourself some grace. Right? Understand that just like everyone else, nobody's really experienced something like this before. Nobody's had to navigate suddenly, working from home while homeschooling in through the summer, quarantine, 90% of everything is closed. So there's really no place to bring your children out to have this outlet. Social gatherings aren't really happening. And so now it's like, oh, and by the way, we're going to start back school here shortly. And it's like, what just happened? And so while there's even debate in that and when are people are going to do it, and it's getting pushed back, and I've seen, all kinds of different scenarios, and some schools are doing like the first month online. And so give yourself grace. Understand that there is zero expectation other than the expectation you've put on yourself that you're going to get this perfectly right and that you're not going to make any mistakes. But also, to the point that Tony was making, make sure you're actually being intentional about seeing your children. Not just saying, hey, because again, what does remote learning require? Technology. And for those that don't have it, they're getting it. It's being provided to them. But that shouldn't be an excuse for or an exchange for your role as a parent to say, hey, like, there's your iPad, just go stream Netflix for 12 hours. I'm overwhelmed. I'm busy. I think we have to be willing to be uncomfortable. And I also really believe in having uncomfortable conversations. Understand that, like, as an adult, Tony, you also said this, and I agree, most adults don't know how to deal with their own emotions. And so how most people parent is, if I had a really good life growing up, I'm going to try and replicate that. If I had a pretty crappy childhood, I'm just going to do the opposite. So whatever happened to me growing up, I'm just going to not do that and then tell myself I'm doing a great job. The problem is, that doesn't necessarily change the narrative. It just maybe continues it, or out of your own avoidance of feeling certain things, we're not doing the best job we can being present for our kids. Understanding emotional intelligence is huge. I think, again, like, let Tony and Joe Smarro recreate the public school system in this country. And those are some topics that we're going to be talking about. I know Yale put out this great curriculum called Ruler, and it's an acronym, and certain schools are doing that, but it's not universal. And kids don't understand, they don't have the basic understanding of what emotional intelligence means. They don't understand what their emotions are, right? And I heard a great talk last week from Dr. Susan David, who said emotions are not directives. Emotions are data. They're data, not directives. And also what we know is that the emotions are the language of our subconscious. So they're valuable. They're communicating something. But if you don't understand, one, what they are, and two, how to express them, we immediately know how to hide them and avoid or numb or deflect. And so I think two parts. One, be honest with yourself. Two, pay attention to your kids. It's easy to deflect away from feeling emotions and communicating emotions, especially because it's uncomfortable. But this is where I would say, reach out, educate yourself, ask people for advice. Everybody knows somebody who knows at least the basics of how to do something like this, or read a book. I mean, again, in working from home, not that, like my wife would say, she has less free time now working from home. It's not as easy as people think it is. But there's time to gain a basic level of something if you think it's a priority. If it's important to you, you'll find the time to do it. I believe that. But I also think, when it comes to our children, understanding their age groups, understanding their limitations, understanding all that is super, super important. But be uncomfortable together. be vulnerable for your child, because also what that's communicating to them is like, hey, look, I know mom or dad right now is super uncomfortable, I can tell, but they're making the effort. And that speaks so much more in action than it does of avoiding doing it altogether. And so that's the last thing, is many people and this is like crisis uh, management flaw 101, is so many people will avoid making the effort and doing anything at all because they're paralyzed by the fear of doing it wrong. And we have to get out of that mindset, right? I would rather make an effort, do it wrong, and simply apologize because my intentions are good. And I stress that point to people so often, is like, don't be afraid of doing it wrong. If your intentions are good, people are going to really understand that, and they're going to resonate with that. But don't let fear paralyze you from acting at all, because obviously the consequences can be much worse.
Yeah, I think that there's something that just hit me as you were talking there, Joe, is the irony of how when we're uncomfortable having those conversations with our kids, and if we fall back, we're not developing emotional resilience ourselves. It's
Yep.
only when we lean in with that vulnerability, when we're willing to allow the uncomfortable side to show up. And there's some great research. I don't know if you've read the book Stroke of Genius. I think that's the name of the book. It's a really good one. I believe that's the name of it. Anyway, this neuroscientist ends up having a stroke. And so her left brain and right brain basically detach in the moment of going through the stroke. And so she's able to see things differently, and then does a lot of testing when she recovers later. And what I believe it was in this research that she discovered that any emotion we feel will only last up to 90 seconds. If you allow yourself just to let yourself feel it, it will subside within 90 seconds. Now, you may have wave after wave, but just to know that 90 seconds is not a very long time. Now, it feels like forever when you're going through that emotion. But, positive and negative emotions, or I don't like saying negative emotions, unpleasant emotions, positive and unpleasant emotions, they'll pass. They all do. And so we just have to be courageous enough to stand there and feel them and let them pass and then move forward. And with kids, it's really interesting, because while kids are often like, don't embarrass me and don't do this and don't do that, they're kind of that, they have that self-conscious shell. They really do want to be embraced. They really do want to be heard. They want to be seen. And when you do that, it actually causes them to be able to stand with their friends and help their friends who may not get that support from their parents. So I think it's really critical to help develop that for yourself and for them.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think too, another important point on that is, if this isn't something that comes natural for you, don't try and do it in the midst of a crisis. That's not the best time to do it. What I would suggest and recommend is that, just like in relationship really, is, you're not going to solve any problem at the level of the problem. But two is, it's not always best to have those difficult conversations when there's intense emotions, because when the emotional mind is high, rational mind is low. And so wait until actually things are going well. Maybe, there's been some time and space, and everything is going well, and you're just sitting around having dinner, and then address it in a very, again, in a calm manner, because what we know about communication is that really only 7% of any dialogue is the words spoken. 93% is made up of your tone and body language. And so leverage that, right? It's not really always what you say. It's just how you say it and what your demeanor is when you're saying that. But say, hey, look, I want to address the fact that we had a tough time yesterday, or, and again, as much as you can focus on the emotional side of it, because yes, Tony's point, well, I haven't read that book and I want to, because I love all things neuroscience. I think it's brilliant. I also get it. It makes sense to me that the emotion is only felt for 90 seconds. If you're out there like, no, that's not true, that's not true. The reason it seems or appears longer for you is because as soon as you have that emotion, you follow that up with a story, one that you've probably told yourself most of your life, and you continue to buy into that story. And some of you will add new chapters to it, and that story becomes a novel, and a novel becomes this thing. And it's like you stay stuck in that story, that negative loop that you've told yourself for so long, which we know is not true. right? It is not true most of the time. The things that we tell ourselves about ourselves is usually very, very inaccurate. So just remember that the stories you tell yourself are fiction. Um, they're not based on fact most time, even though if it's your experience, because everything in life is neutral, right? It's like Shakespeare said, I think, but it's everything in life is neutral. It's your mind that makes it otherwise, and so it's how you think about it. We determine in our minds if something is good or bad, right or wrong, not the circumstance itself.
That is powerful, just to contemplate that. And I want to go back to something you said too. You were talking about how the emotions are basically data and information, which I love that idea because, for maybe it was my misunderstanding, maybe it was how they actually taught me growing up. It was like emotions were like this, distant second thing. And we didn't, emotions weren't that valid of an information tool, if you will.
Yeah.
And today I'm like, no, they're two pathways. It's like the emotions actually connect your brain and your body. And I love how you talk about being the language, if you will, or the information system for the subconscious mind, because that really is it. And then so you've got the rational intelligence and you've got the emotional intelligence. They work side by side. That being the case, I'm wondering, this is just a question that popped in as we were talking. Our kids are going to be going back to school if they're actually in the classroom, right? And I know my daughter, we just found out today, one of my daughters is going back to the classroom. They're going to be wearing masks more than likely. So we're going to see a situation where suddenly all the facial expressions are covered. How can parents help their kids? And this is just off the cuff here. You haven't prepared for this one, I know, but I mean, there's got to be a challenge here, of course, with reading emotions and reading other people. So what can we do as parents to help our kids get ready for that and process through that as they experience it?
Yeah, it's huge. And even for me in my day-to-day world, I mean, it's been a barrier. We have to wear face coverings every time we're interacting with someone. And a big part, again, understanding that communication pie, if 93% of communication is made up on tone and body language, but you're covering up, like imagine if I did this whole interview like this, most of you would be like, what is going on? It's very difficult. And so maybe we should have considered that, Tony. That would have been interesting. This might have went viral. Like, what are those guys doing? They are wearing their face coverings virtually. I love it. No, this is a huge, huge problem though. And not only that, but think about just the nature of children. Again, I'm a firm believer that all people are inherently good. They just lose their way and forget truth. And so some fall by the wayside and appear bad. I also believe that the kids who are the bullies, the kids who are the meanest, the kids who are the most outspoken, even the kids who are the class clowns and all that, like a lot of those outgoing types that are seeking attention or creating these diversions to gain attention, oftentimes have an underlying issue with depression. But I think when we talk specifically about the face coverings, I think it just creates another barrier. One, yes, you can't read facial expressions. Two, it's very hard to hear people because just human instinct when people are talking, a lot of people look into eyes, but they rotate between the eyes and the mouth. And that's something that we've been doing since babies, right? As you look at people's lips or mouths when they're talking, especially if, your tone is supposed to be low because you're in the library. How are you going to whisper with a mask on in a library with 6 feet apart? Like, it's just a very weird thing that I don't know how much thought has gone into this. I also worry about something simple is like, what quality of mask do you have? Because this is yet another barrier to point to the haves and the have-nots, is who's wearing these hand-me-down paper masks, who's wearing the homemade ones that have like something silly, who's going to show up wearing one that like is derogatory or negative or making some type of statement, and they're going to cause, there's so much to be unpacked with that. But my fear is the loss, because again, not only do we have masks, but we're going to be discouraged from handshakes, high five, hugs, like no contact. And we're human beings. We're meant to be physically connected, right? I mean, there's actual science in like what happens when we physically connect and the oxytocin release that we have when we connect with people. And to say, hey, don't touch your peers, don't touch your classmates. What does PE look like? Yeah, I don't know if I'm answering it, Tony. I'm adding to the problem, but I do think that this is going to be an issue that honestly, I don't know that anyone knows or understands the answers, but we'll learn quickly, because I think those first 2 weeks of kids going back to school and having the barrier, because is the teacher going to wear a mask? Because when I go teach cadets at the training academy, I'm not wearing a mask, but they all are. And so while they can connect with me and see me as I'm instructing, anytime they ask a question, it's like, what? Huh? I can't hear you. And the people across the room certainly can't hear you because we're all distance out. It really is a barrier. And I worry about how much are we forcing the issue? Is it necessary? Is it worth it right now? And I think no one really knows those answers. And we're just kind of using our humans to create this trial to see, like, oh, let's just hope for the best. And we'll see. I think time will tell. It reveals all truths. So I think there's going to be many lessons learned over the first 2 to 4 weeks of kids returning to school.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to point it out. You pointed out far more than I'd even thought of in the whole issue. And thank you for that, because now it's things for me to be aware of. And I guess my whole perspective on this is I'm just going to watch my daughter. I pick her up and drop her off every day at school. So she's an extreme introvert, but she wants to go back to school because, and this is something you might want to be aware of with your kids too, is, you know, if you're listening to this, how do your kids learn best? Are they audibles? Yep. Are they visual? Are they process learners? When we went to the last 3 months of school, we went from the classroom to online. There were tears almost every day because she is just not a two-dimensional reading type of learner. She learns from the social cues of the classroom. Yep. And so I'm curious to see what's going to happen. But I mean, there's going to be some long drive homes, I think, and some probably long drives to school in the morning too. So, man, it's good. So, well, we had a couple other topics that we wanted to kind of hit on too, I think, a little bit here. So let's talk about, because we talked about school quite a bit. We can go back to that if you want to, but I know there's obviously parents dealing with issues of like, what am I going to do? Let's say my kids are in school or they're at home. There's a change to the situation here. And, you know, going back to work. So what do the leaders at work need to be thinking about? Because what I see right now is we've got an ecosystem of school, we've got an ecosystem of business, we've got ecosystem of government, and they're really not talking together, even though they make up this grand ecosystem that we call life and society. Yeah. And so what is it that these business leaders ought to be aware of or ought to be thinking about with the parents coming back to school? And maybe people that are not parents, you know, but what do they need to be concerned about right now?
I think really unpacking that to identify how because again, this is going to be different for any business, regardless of size. You know, if you're running a very small business of 2 to 5 people or a massive corporation where there's thousands of people, obviously the weight of the problem is going to be different. But I think, you know, take a vested interest in your people and understand what their specific needs are as much as possible. And again, if this is a big corporation, there's obviously levels and tiers of this. And we have first line supervisors and things like that, but not knowing again, how many people do you have under you? One, is that realistic or is it overwhelming? Hopefully the subordinate to supervisor or leader ratio isn't so overwhelming that you can't manage it. But if you should know everyone on your team, you should know as much as possible everyone in your company. And you should also know not just like who they are and what their like strengths are and things like that best bring value to your business, but what are their challenges? Who's in their home? Do they have school-age children? Do they need special accommodations? Is there a way that if, you know, 30% of your workforce is made up of single parents, can there be special accommodations made for them? Is there a way that you can bring other people together and pool resources and say, hey, look, this is what's going on. We know that this is a temporary issue. While we don't know what the future looks like, we do know that while we're returning to school and there's a lot of uniqueness to this, it's a temporary situation. Is there any way that we can maybe pull together and, hey, this group of people is going to work from home because it benefits them or they have the capacity to do this and that? That is an individual leader. And again, Simon Sinek says it, all these great thought leaders talk about like the staple character or trait of the best leaders is empathy. And I think beyond leadership, that should be human trait number one, is having some empathy for other people and the experience that they're going through. And remember, if people are willing to emote we should be appreciative of the fact that they have the insight enough to actually emote, because the alternative is the ones who don't emote. They suppress, they compartmentalize, they shove, and then eventually they implode. And you don't realize that it's a problem until it's a significant problem. And now you're looking at sanctioning behaviors or having to let people go, or it's, something catastrophic happened. And it's because we never dealt with it early on. And so I don't like seeing when that happens. And we've been involved as a firm and a business in helping companies when things were identified for years. And then suddenly it's like implosion. Oh my God, can you help? We've got to be better than that. We've got to be willing to be uncomfortable up front. And again, I think as a leader, if we're willing to be vulnerable and prioritize our people, because remembering that's our most valuable asset, our people are what drive our business. And how do we best support them? Because it goes so far with loyalty and, understanding the absenteeism versus presenteeism and how that impacts your bottom line. And so I would say just spend time doing a discovery session. Bring your people in and say, hey, look, Jane, tell me what's going on. What do you have at home? Tony, what do you have going on? Peter, what do you like? Okay, let's create a little think tank here. Let's do it virtually. Like, let's meet, at this time, set up a Zoom call, and I want to know, and we'll have a scribe, and I want to know what people's limitations are going forward. Imagine working for a corporation or a firm that did that. I think people would really, really feel appreciated and valued and seen if their leadership stepped in and did that. Because what we know, Tony, and you know this better than I do, is so many corporations are going to be like, oh, your kids went back to school? Right on. Business as usual. We're not changing anything, and let's just carry on. And so the employees feeling like, now I've got this added stress. I don't feel supported. I don't feel like I can go and say anything. So I'm just going to try and deal with it on my own. And that's where presenteeism kicks in, and people are showing up, but they're not there at all because they're stressed about what's happening at school. They're stressed about how they're going to pick up their kid. They're stressed about, are they going to do distance learning? I mean, there's so many things that, again, we have to be willing to have empathy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the danger area that I see is, we've got kids who are going to be potentially dealing with a lot of, emotional issues, mental wellness issues there with everything that's happening in school. You're going to have parents who are going to be dealing with things. You're going to have those who don't have kids, not necessarily really understanding the stress that other people are under, but now maybe they're taking on a bigger load because the parents have to offset some of the challenges because of what they've got going on. So it's not something that's easily fixed, I would say. How are you finding some of your clients are best dealing with this? Some of these corporations that you're working with, what are they doing? What are they putting in place? You've mentioned kind of that having those meetings to really get to understand what the limitations are. Beyond that, what are they trying to do?
I think even just things like this, we have been asked to do several webinars, several like virtual lunch and learn sessions, whatever it is, I think as a corporation, the moment you say, hey, we're going to take an hour, not that you have to do it on your own time, but like while you're working, we want you to log in or sign in and watch this session. And we're going to just talk about wellness. We're going to talk about developing resiliency. We're going to talk about self-care. I think that goes a long way. One of our clients is asking for these like 4 to 6 minute videos talking about one, de-escalation in the workplace, but two, the benefits of developing resiliency, self-care, wellness, and all that. And so then they're going to roll those out to their employees because that's a bigger operation. And so again, it really does, scale dictates and depends on what you do. I don't know. It's one of those things that I think it's, if your people value you as a leader, you probably know. And if you're like, well, I'm not so sure, then you probably know, right? And how forthcoming are your people? And this is one of the things that we talk about when we go in, and I love doing these discoveries, because if you as a business owner, Tony, were to go to your bottom, the lowest ranking person in your organization and say, hey, Bobby, so how do you feel working here? Like, how do you like this? They're going to tell you as the boss who's writing their checks, like, oh, it's great. Thank you so much. I appreciate this, blah, blah, blah. But there's value to having these, third-party people coming in, or these, unbiased, organizations come in and say, hey, we're going to do an anonymous, but I want to know. And so doing these discoveries and types like that, I think is really revealing, because when you can say, hey, look, 27% of your workforce doesn't trust that you have their back if they're suffering through something, that's important to know. But again, it's in the world of law enforcement. Law enforcement agencies are like, yes, we love this de-escalation training, crisis intervention training. Yes, we need this. We just don't have money. We can't afford it. And our comeback to that is, well, I mean, you really can't afford not to, for one, but two, like, you can afford it. You just have your money tied up in other things that are priorities to you. And so when you start to understand that this is a priority, then suddenly the money starts to free up. And that's sadly, post George Floyd, that's exactly what's happening. Is now agencies are coming forward and they found all kinds of money for de-escalation training. And it's like, why do we have to get to this point where it's always like in response to something terrible? It's always reactive. And that's the way a lot of people are. Active shooter training, reactive. We're going to do all these things, reactive. It's what we call post boom. The work we do, we really focus on the preventative side. We want to prevent that from ever being needed. We want to prevent the employees from ever needing to utilize those type of services, because if they're feeling overwhelmed, they can just show up and tell you, hey boss, I'm really struggling. Like, I'm going through some personal things and I need help. Like, I'm worried about my son going back to school. I'm a single parent. I don't know how I'm going to do this. I'm really stressed out about this. And then the leader celebrating that person and saying, hey, thank you so much for trusting me with your personal matter. I really want to help you get through this. And everything's like handled on a one-on-one basis like that. I think, things like that go a long way. And the ripple effect is really, really significant when you start to do things like that, because people will, they'll champion for you when you do something well, but they also will spread the gospel when you mess something up and treat someone poorly. So we have to make sure that we understand it goes both ways.
Absolutely. Shift gears just for a second here. Deanna asked a question here on Facebook. She said, I'd like to know what Joe is seeing on the streets as far as the unstable homes and the impact on children.
It's huge. So for those of you not familiar with this interface, it's called ACEs. So the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. It's this study. It's been around since 91. It was funded in 94 by the CDC, but Dr. Anda and Folletti did this research where they looked at clusters of trauma and the impact on like public health. And so anyone can take it. You can Google adverse childhood experiences. I think it's important for all of us as adults to know what our own score is. Again, be mindful, because some people going through it might get triggered. And so don't put yourself through the paces if you're not at that place where you're ready to deal with it. But you have a 0 to a 10, 10 being the worst. Kids are absolutely being impacted. And I think this is one of those things where, again, how many millions of people have lost their job? How many millions of those millions of people had kids? How are those kids being impacted? And now we're just going to say, get back to school. And I think this is one of those issues too that, I've talked about for a long time about, we have this unfair expectation as a people. So many kids are living in very, very unstable homes with a lot of trauma, and they're exposed to pretty horrific situations. And yet, because they show up to school, the expectation immediately becomes, just because you're here, you are supposed to pay attention, you're supposed to do well, you're supposed to prepare, you're supposed to pass. And there's very little, very, very little effort placed into, like, what happens when you go home from here? And it's this whole respect of privacy, and I don't want to cross the line, and what are the boundaries, and we're not allowed to ask certain questions. And it's like, again, because here's what I know to be true. In my line of work, I see it so often, and we have a wonderful program here where anytime there's a situation where an officer shows up and there's a child involved, a school-age child involved in that home, if there's been a domestic violence, if there's been an arrest, if there's been anything, there's a simple notification that goes out to that school. Not a whole lot of details, but it's called Handle with Care. And there's several agencies around the country that do this, but it just notifies the school of like, hey, just so you know, Johnny Baker here had a traumatic experience last night in his home where the police were involved. Handle with care today. Like, loosen your expectation. He might not go to school. He might not be fully involved with the activities. He may not be able to pay attention all day. But beyond that, think about how many people don't have that program. It's sad for me, especially again in a big city, of how many times I've seen these kids that it's so unstable. There's so much trauma. Their diet consists of Funyuns and Monster energy drink. Their sleep patterns are maybe 3 hours a night when their eyes burn out from Call of Duty or Fortnite. there's chaos in their home, there's violence in their home, and then yet because they go to school, which for some people sadly is like that's daycare, even when they're in 7th grade, it's like, hey, I need you just to get out of the house, and we send them off to school because they're a nuisance or they're a problem in their home, or because the courts say they have to go so I don't get in trouble. But it's really just like this respite for me in my unstable home, and they're there not being able to pay attention. Learning disabilities, they're 2, 3, 4 years behind the actual curriculum that they're in front of. And this points to the systemic issue of what, again, is our school system. And we kind of push people through the paces, and it's unfair. And then the bigger issue is those kids grow up, they become 18. Now suddenly they're this arbitrary adult because they're 18. And it's like, hey, suddenly you should have life figured out. When really they've been kind of just forced through this system and they're not prepared. And then we wonder like, wow, why are these suffering so much? Why are these young kids suffering so much? And it's because they went the last 12 years really, really unseen, not feeling valued, not feeling heard, lacking love. And so what does that then produce? What does that give fruit to as an adult? And I think we see it far too often.
Yeah, it's even, I mean, just for me to hear that, just heartbreaking. I mean, because I'm not in it every day. I know it exists, but I'm not in it every day.
Yeah.
I can't imagine it would take me a whole lot of work to be able to be in it every day like you are. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
What Deanna asked, kind of what can communities do to handle some of this during COVID right now? And also then kind of follow up with that, what can companies do to help the communities? And I know with her work as a nonprofit, she's probably looking for some ideas that she can put out there to really help the communities that she's serving right now.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the best antidotes to depression is joining a group and volunteering for a cause. And so this is a great opportunity to get creative in how you do that. I know, losing the ability to socially gather really has created a significant impact on many communities and a lot of nonprofits and a lot of these volunteering groups. But here's what we know is that the needs have not gone away. In fact, a lot of needs, and those are to be determined by whatever the community has identified, because it's going to be different everywhere. So like here, I'll tell you, there was a massive shortage of food and people going hungry. And the food bank was just, I mean, it was like national news. How many, like thousands of cars lined up daily to try and get in line at the food bank to get some food. And so finding ways to get creative to say, hey, how can we augment these groups that are already tried and true? We don't have to reinvent the wheel. This is the thing, is some people try and, there's a big difference between serving selfishly and serving selfishly. It's hard to say. If you're trying to like create or carve your niche and set yourself up, it might be a struggle. Don't try and reinvent the wheel during times of serving people. Look at organizations and corporations that are already doing good and then just say, hey, how can I augment this or do this on a smaller scale? Because just because they offer a service doesn't mean that it can't also be done somewhere else, even if it's just, hey, we're going to go 30 minutes outside of our area because there's a smaller community and we're going to replicate what they're doing. So whether it's food, whether it's, again, it was funny when everything went virtual, excuse me, when everything went virtual, there was like this massive consumption of content and everybody was like, throw everything online, content. Everyone was giving things away for free. And then it was like, oh, okay, people have content fatigue. Now they're worn out. They don't want to consume content anymore. Now it's like, get away from the content. So what I would say is it doesn't have to be something that is necessarily educational, providing a good or a product. Do something fun, right? Find a way to do something where it's, so this ties in, Tony, I'm gonna make this point. So very fortunate, just partnered with this incredible company out of California, using VR, virtual reality. And they created this app for resiliency. And it's like the most beautiful thing. And there's like this beautiful vista and you're surrounded in the world. It's 360 degrees and they're playing like Bach or some beautiful like classical symphony music while you're immersed in this vista. And your like right hand controller is this baton and you're like a composer. And it's got like these sparkly lights at the end of it and you're just playing with it. And it's like a 5-minute respite. And they're they're testing it with the military and law enforcement, all this, and it's phenomenal. But I think, it's fascinating to me that you could take something like that and just provide somebody an outlet and understand the benefits of what that does for them. Give someone the ability to take a time out. I'm doing a thing here soon where they're like, hey, we're going to create what our new normal is. And there's a company here in town that says, no, we're going to hold this quote unquote conference where we're going to socially distance, and we're going to limit the conference. It's free, but come together. We're going to have 20 people or whatever. We're going to have hand sanitizer, hand washing stations, masks, all this stuff's provided. And then each room is going to have different things. So like we're going to have resources for healthcare. We're going to have resources for school. We're going to have resources for like financial programs for small businesses. And that's creative, right? And so think outside of the box. Two things: don't create the wheel. Look at what other people are doing. Take it to another area that's underserved. And then the other thing is, or get creative and do something, but not where it's just going to be, I'm going to force this on you, but rather I'm going to invite you to do something fun and play with that. I mean, sit with that. Have a think group, come up with something. What can we do for fun that's maybe 30 minutes or an hour where we can just make people laugh and smile, and remember that maybe there is hope, because I believe there is, and we have to just take a time out from what is our reality sometimes, and remember the truth, and not get so focused on the scary, dark, unknown.
I think that's a really good tip, especially having fun is so underrated.
Yeah.
I catch myself. I mean, I'm the type of guy that I've had to learn how to have fun. Unfortunately, my two daughters give me an excuse to be silly every now and then, and of course they roll their eyes. We have a dad meter, and it when the eyes roll back in the head and the huff and puff happens, then I know I've achieved something admirable. You're a dad. You're a dad. You know what that's like.
Oh yeah, yeah. Hey, you want something fun, like have your group or whatever say, you know what, we're gonna all create a TikTok account and like try some of these dances and share them and post them. Like, make fun of yourself, have fun. Like don't take life so serious. Remember, it's a game. What kind of player do you want to be in it? So allow yourself to laugh, allow yourself to be laughed at. Again, as long as it's all in good fun, and but something like that. Yeah, there's all kinds of options. So
very cool. So we have been going for 75 minutes almost here, and this is awesome. You've got some great information here. Thank you. A lot of great shout outs on the chat bot here. Anything else you want to kind of leave us with today, or anything else that comes to mind that maybe something we promised to cover and we didn't get to yet?
Yeah, I'll be honest, Tony, I tell you, I forgot the list that you even sent me, but this has just been a fun conversation. Again, I love talking about this. I know I can be long-winded, so I do apologize for that. Hopefully I didn't sabotage the conversation, but while I don't remember exactly what we outlined that we were going to talk about, I do hope that there was value for this in somebody. Again, I know everyone's at different places, but here's what we need to remember is that, if you feel like there's no hope, I don't want to end on a doom and gloom and low, but suicide is a real problem. And 90% of people who die by suicide have feelings of hopelessness for long periods of time before they actually end up taking their lives. And so if you are feeling hopeless, sit with this idea that anytime you're in the midst of a crisis, the first and best thing you can do is shorten your time frames, right? So don't worry about down the road. Don't worry about next year. Don't worry about what's going to happen next. Like, worry about what am I going to, it's 8:45 right now. What am I going to do between 8:45 and 8:50? I mean, really shorten your time frame, because the more we allow our mind to think big, the scarier and bigger the problem may appear. The second thing is learn to zoom out. If I'm actually writing a book right now, Tony, this is a selfish plug, but a couple months away. But one of the experience I was just writing about was how profound of an impact being on a naval ship with 5,000 people, a massive ship, it's like a steel city in the middle of the ocean, the impact that had on my life. Because there was a moment where I was standing up on the flight deck. There's 5,000 people on the ship, but it was so early in the morning, nobody was out there. I didn't see one other human being. And it's just at the break of day. And I remember feeling like how insignificant I was, how insignificant we are. And it's not to say that we don't individually have value. It's not to say that we don't individually have worth, because I believe we all do. But in that moment, it's like, man, there is such a massive world around us, a beautiful world around us. And it's the times we get stuck in this nuance of, this is hard, this sucks, this isn't worth it, I can't deal with this, I don't know how to deal with this. Learn to zoom out, change your perspective, change your lens. I'm fascinated with space, and I always think, like, anytime I'm really stressed out or overwhelmed, I'm like, what would this look like if I was on the International Space Station looking down at this problem? You wouldn't see it, right? All you would see is just the beauty and the magnificence of what is this earth. And so just that's my advice and takeaway for people is, feeling stressed and overwhelmed is absolutely normal. Don't tell yourself it's not. Like Tony said, there's no such thing as negative emotions. There's just uncomfortable or unpleasant emotions. Your emotions shouldn't get to dictate what you do next. They shouldn't control your behaviors and actions. They should simply communicate something to you. And most of the stories that you tell yourself are made up stories stemming from your childhood. Um, there's all kinds of things I could go down because I love these rabbit holes. So I'm going to spare you from that, Tony. But again, that's my takeaway is do not give up hope. Like anything else, this is a season. COVID's a season. It's pandemic's a season. We can look back on history and say, yes, while we maybe have never experienced something like this, we have experienced pain. We've experienced global loss, and we've gotten through it. We've gotten through it as a world, as a country, and as a people, and as an individual. And, all you have to do is look back on your history and say, have I survived something difficult before? Yes. Chances are absolutely yes. And you can do it again. Reach out to someone. Don't ever suffer alone. Suffering in silence is one of the worst things that you can do. Talk to somebody. Talking is processing. Processing provides hope. And again, even to me as an individual, I would love to be a resource for anyone, just to provide some coaching, peer support, help, inspiration, whatever it is. And that's why I appreciate Tony inviting me to be on this, because I believe in the value of people. And again, like I said in my talk I did, I see you, even virtually. I see you, and that's because I am you.
Thank you for those tips. And as you were sharing that, it's the reflection I have was, when I get stuck and I can't move forward, and in business, right? And it's the exercise I typically do is, what can I do in the next 5 minutes? Yep. And there's power in that. I learned it from a mentor, but one of the aspects of power that I've learned myself is, if I ask a how question, that's usually what gets me stuck. And I think that's what gets people into hopelessness, because they can't figure out how to move forward. If you switch that one word, what can I do? Then it becomes an empowering thing, because you start to think about, you can't ask that question without coming up with an answer. It could be as simple as, like, what can I do? Well, I can sit here and stare at the wall for 5 minutes, but it's empowering because it's something I can choose to do. That's just my take on that. So I love that. That's great advice there. Well, we've had some great conversation. I know you and I both could go for a lot longer, but I think the audience would probably fall asleep. We have some good stats on the views and all that, but they'd be sleepy by the time we get done. How can people reach out to you? What's the best way for them to reach you? And I want to quickly too, before you do that, if you want to hear more, you had a TED Talk. I see you watch the TED Talk. It's actually a very, very good talk. I loved it. How can they reach you if they want to reach out, either for their business or on a personal level?
Yeah, so the company is Solution Point Plus, and I know Tony tagged it on this video, and so the website is solutionpointplus.com, and then I'm on most social media at Joe Smarro. So Twitter, Instagram at Joe Smarro, and then Facebook, same thing, and our LinkedIn, our Instagram, our Twitter is all Solution Point Plus. So business side, Solution Point Plus, personal side at Joe Smarro. I would love to connect with people and chat about whatever.
Awesome. Well, everyone, thank you for jumping out here with us. And just a heads up for tomorrow, we'll be back at our normal time. We had to start a little bit late tonight. 7:00 tomorrow. I will have Hugh Ballou. If you don't know Hugh, he was a conductor, and we're going to talk about leadership and how conducting an orchestra lines up with leadership. So we will see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Central. And until then, have an amazing evening.
Thank you.